Welcome back to Watercolor Wednesday with the Whittier Public Library. I'm Kelly, I'm the Young Adult Librarian, and today we're going to be using this book, How to Paint Watercolor Landscapes. We're going to be painting this beautiful beach landscape. So to start, we're going to go ahead and sketch out the landscape. We need a horizon line, some rough sketches of some rocks right here. I'm going to sketch in this water. Now we want to sketch in our mountains. I can't forget our clouds. Okay, there we have our sketched landscape. So taking my brush, I'm dipping it into clean water. We're gonna wet all of this sky area. So I'm dropping droplets onto my page to make it easier for myself to keep my edges wet. We're gonna be using the wet on wet and the wet on dry technique. This is gonna be the wet on wet technique right now. So you're just gonna wet all along the mountain range at the top. Be careful not to put too much water. It might start to warp your page. So I'm going to dab lightly at the clouds, and I'm going to see that it's getting kind of dry. So I'm doing it at the top of each cloud. Okay, so the tops of the clouds are now dry. So I'll have to mix this dark brown. As you can see, it's a dark muddy brown. And I'm going to take the ultramarine blue that I have and mix it with the brown to make a black. There's my black. So I'm just getting more ultramarine blue and adding it to this. And then I'm gonna grab some of this and mix it with the white. So I don't want my white to get too muddy. Alright, this made this sort of gray-blue color. I want it to be a little bit more gray, so I'm going to add some of this black to it. Okay, now I'm going to take my brush, dip it in my water, and put it right here on the palette so that it waters it down for me. Now I'm going to go back in and start to go into the bottoms of the clouds and sort of flow in this color. I'm washing it out as I go to kind of lighten it and give it some sort of shading, and I'm putting drops of water on there as well. If your page is still wet like mine is, this might actually run a little bit into some of the sky, so be careful. If it's dry, like how mine is starting to get on the left, you're using the wet on dry technique and it won't be that much trouble. If yours is still too dark, like this one, you just dab your napkin on top of it gently and pick it up. Alright, so those are our clouds. Now, assuming your sky is still wet, mine is not. So I'm going to go back in and go around the clouds a little bit, right here on the left, and wet it again, just in case. I have to be careful because if I'm not careful, some of the cloud will run into the sky. So now that I've wet it again, this side is still very wet. So I'm gonna now create the blue for the sky. I'm gonna take my ultramarine. Now we want to get some of this blue-green. We're going to water it down. Let's go ahead and take this and put it into the sky. I wet my brush after touching that color because I don't want my sky to be so extremely blue. So I tapped it into the water that's already on the sky, and it also watered it down for me. This is the wet on wet technique that I said we would be using. So keep that in mind. That's why we put some over here, so that we can use it for the ocean as well. Be careful if it starts to blend in with your cloud, like how mine did right here. It's not a bad thing, it's just you might get all the way in your cloud and you might not want that. Clean up your edges around the mountain range. And if you got any that you didn't want in there, remember, just pick it up with your napkin or paper towel. So I think that looks great. I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the next step. We're gonna be painting the sea the same color as the sky. So we need to go ahead and wet the sea. Make sure you're using clean water because you want this area to be really clear. Again, I do this to keep my edges wet so that there's no harsh lines when I add in the color. Okay, using this wet on wet technique, I'm going to get the lighter color and brush it in. You're gonna let that dry until it's completely dry before we move on to the next step. Okay, so my paper started to dry, but then it started to do this. If this is what yours is doing, there's a few ways you could fix it. I'm gonna try a few things right now to show you. So it has a little bit of sheen to it still, so it's a little bit wet still, and it has this harsh line that happens when you do wet on dry. So that means this started to dry while this remained wet, and then it left a puddle right here. So we're gonna try to pick that up with our paper towel just to see if we can help that out. Okay, that didn't work too much. It left it still like that. So now there's another option I can try. I'm gonna wet my brush, load it with some water, and I'm gonna brush into this harsh line. To be careful when doing this because it might leave another harsh line where these areas are. So I'm going to clean out my brush, wipe in some light color or clear water basically, and start from the light to the dark and keep doing it repeatedly. Now that I've wet it, there's another thing I could do again. I'm going to pick up all of that water that I brushed on and start to move my way down to this darker area. I have to be careful because as you can see, it picks up this pigment here. So I'm going to add in some of that blue again. I believe I took care of that spot. I'm going to now let it dry once more and bring in my napkin underneath, crumpled up like so that it's tilted at an angle, and it should dry now. If you're worried about that happening again, what you could do is you'll get a piece of your paper towel, bring it just the corner in, and let the corner soak up for the water. Now we're going to go ahead and brush in the background of the beach and the cliff area. We're going to use that same brown. You're going to want to make this area in the forefront a lot darker than you do the back areas in the background, because then it kind of creates this depth and this atmospheric perspective, making you think that you're at this edge of the beach. I want this mountain area to be a little bit darker than the rest. Okay, so it's gone and it's dried now, and so we're gonna add in the darker areas to this now. So to do this to the mountains, we have to re-wet the mountains. Okay, let's go ahead and add in that darker color. So again, I'm gonna get the brown, mix it into this area, wet my brush, wet it again to clean it off, mix in the blue, load it up on the brush, mix it in with the brown, and it's made this beautiful black color. Now, we want to have a little bit of brown in there, so I have some of this brown left over from earlier that's been watered down. So I'm going to go ahead and brush my brush in there. Maybe add some more to that. And then I'm going to just water this down by dipping my brush and wiping it along the water cup, and then dragging it in to my mountains. So it's wet down here, so I'm just getting the wet water area and brushing it up into the dark. I'm going to get some of the dark and mix it in with the brown again. And if you get any puddles in areas you don't want them, just brush the puddle through to the area that you do want them in. So we're going to let that dry, and while that's drying, we're going to get this brown again and make that black one more time. And we're going to go ahead and outline some of our rocks now. One more time. Now, let's go back to those mountains. We are almost done. So, just lightly brush some water along the top of the edges, just the top. We're going to add in some of that blue to what we had over here. If not, just make it again. Bit, we're just gonna lightly add some to the water. If it's creating a harsh line for you like it is for me, add in some clean water or muddy clean water. Alright, there you have it, and when this is all dry, like mine is, you'll go ahead and erase any pencil marks that you have left. I recommend just drawing it very lightly the first time, but I had to personally do it darker so that you could see it on my camera. So I'm going to try to erase some of this. It may not come off all the way, that's why I recommend doing it very light when you draw it. So there you go. There you have it, our beautiful landscape painting. If you want to borrow this book, you could go ahead and check it out from the Whitwood Branch Library for curbside pickup. We can also transfer it to the Whittier Train Depot for you as well. So thank you so much. Have a great day and join us next time.